Tesla stock sold off aggressively in last Friday's trading session, and in my last video I went ahead and broke down the underlying reasoning why we saw a lot of selling pressure for Tesla. But one of the frequently asked questions I got was, is this the bottom for Tesla? And so in this video, I want to go ahead and share my insight on Tesla, both from the perspective of a long-term investor, but also someone who trades Tesla in the short term. And so with that said, I want to point us to something that's pretty interesting. For example, on our earnings call in April, Elon Musk said that he hoped to hand over the first customer truck at an event in late September. Now, of course, the trucks that we're referring to are the Cybertrucks. So this is a looming catalyst event that could completely flip everything over. However, I want to point out to something else we should pay attention to. So on Wednesday, we have the ISM services coming out as well as the Fed's Beige Book. And so a strong ISM service report can boost market confidence and drive prices upwards, while inversely, a weak report can have the opposite effect. But along the Fed's Beige Book is something you absolutely want to pay attention to, because this is a report published 8 times a year that summarizes economic conditions across the 12 Federal Reserve districts, right? And so it provides qualitative information gathered from business contacts, economists, and market experts. And one of the things I constantly preach on the channel is that you want to have a holistic approach in the market, right? Every time I talk about Tesla, I don't just talk about the stock chart, I don't just talk about the fundamentals, and I don't just talk about the catalyst news. See, a lot of individuals on YouTube only stick to one lane, but I understand that the markets are much more dynamic than we tend to give them credit for, which is why I pay attention to macroeconomic events as well as the fundamentals, as well as the technicals, as well as alternative data, and I put it all together to really put the pieces and make it much more clear. But on top of that, on September 7th, we have a lot of speakers from the Federal Reserve. Now, you may notice that I've highlighted 2 separate colors. Now, the reason why you see different colors for different speakers is because I put the speakers in the blue to emphasize that these are members in the voting district, meaning they have a say in what goes on in monetary policy, versus, Raphael Bostic, he's highlighted in pink because he does not have a say in what the Federal Reserve is going to do on their meeting in September 20th. Now, for a while, I stood my ground saying that's very unlikely that the Federal Reserve is going to hike in September. And based on what we're seeing with the probabilities, we're seeing that it's shifting downwards completely, where now there's only 7% of market participants who believe that the Feds will hike. And this was a much higher number just a couple of weeks ago. And so the reason why I've been staying my ground, regardless of what everyone else thinks, and why we're seeing everyone kind of convert to the idea that I have, is simply because a lot of the data is going in the direction for the Federal Reserve. So it wouldn't make sense to continue aggressively hiking. Of course, on September 20th, that's going to be the day where we actually want to see what they end up doing. Now, I shared a chart on this channel previously highlighting that September is a month where there is a lot of volatility historically, but we have to understand that historical prices are not indicative of future performance. So this is just something that we just kind of want to look at, but it doesn't hold too much weight. But we also want to understand that September could be a little bit rough. But with that said, I want to go ahead and hop into my laptop and then discuss some aspects that we want to pay attention to in regards to Tesla from a technical perspective. So we are officially in my laptop taking a look at Tesla stock, and I know that in the beginning of this video we talked about several different data points, and if you're someone who's not familiar with my approach, it could seem a bit overwhelming to go ahead and look at the markets and the economy in several different directions and then tying that back to Tesla stock. But I'm going to do my best to provide some clarity and oversimplify it, right? So let's talk about a few things. When we think about Tesla, we know that from a fundamental aspect, there's no data coming out for September, right? We know that in September, we're not getting an earnings report. And we also know that delivery numbers are not coming out in September. And I consider delivery numbers a fundamental aspect, as it's an indicator for what we will most likely see for the earnings. And so we don't have that coming out. That's most likely coming out in mid-October to late October. So we got to cross out fundamental data coming out for Tesla that could influence the price action. What do we have? Well, let's look at it. Well, as I said earlier in the beginning of this video, we have several different economic events happening, right? We have the Fed Beige Book, we have the ISM services, and we have several Fed members speaking, as well as the decision on monetary policy happening on September 20th. So that's something that we have for certain. So we want to pay attention to the economic data. But I also mentioned that we have a catalyst event such as the announcement of Cybertrucks, which doesn't have a date. Well, we want to put that to the side. And I view that once that information does come out, that's going to be a positive catalyst for Tesla. But again, we don't have a specific date. So we just want to put that to the side and just know that when that announcement does come out, it's most likely going to provide some optimism and be a positive catalyst for Tesla. We just don't know when. Okay, so we just have right now just the economic data and then the price action. So let's go ahead and touch on the price action real quick. So for a while now, in a few videos, I've highlighted that this was an area that we wanted to pay attention to for Tesla. Now, did I know that Tesla was going to sell off aggressively on Friday? Absolutely not. I don't have a crystal ball, and I always try to emphasize that. So why did I call out that this was an area that we wanted to watch out for? Well, in previous videos, I said, hey, when we look at the volume profile, which is volume relative to price, which is completely different from your traditional volume relative to time, we know that it's very high over here. So that means that there's a lot of exchanging between buying and selling. And so that creates areas of consolidation like we've seen in the past, and it could also form a support or a resistance. In this case, it ended up being a resistance, and when you use that technical aspect and confluence with the catalyst event that we got on Friday, well, it triggered a sell-off. But I want to point out to something that's pretty interesting when we're just looking at the technicals, right? So let's go ahead and show you guys something. So we see that on Friday, although Tesla did sell off, it had this wick bouncing off of this area, and that's very notable. Why is that? Well, that means that there was some demand from buyers to jump in over here and bounce upwards, and we know that in the past, this area has been somewhat of a support as well. So that's something that is interesting, as we know that if it did break below it, if Tesla does, right? If it did or if it does, whatever you want to say, right? If Tesla does break below it, well, we know that there's very little volume relative to price, and if there's more selling pressure and there's little volume relative to price, that could push the order books down and we could capitulate. But that's not what happened. We saw buyers stepped in and Tesla kind of started bouncing upwards. So what are some things we want to look at? Well, I believe that the only thing we could really go off of right now is pretty much economic data. And right now, what we want to see from the economic data is one, showing that the Feds are going to pause in September. And that would be very optimistic because, of course, high interest rates are not good for the business of Tesla, right? We know that auto loans are at all-time highs. And it's very difficult for individuals to finance a Tesla. I know some individuals who watch my channel, they could outright buy a Tesla, and that's completely fine. But we have to understand that when Tesla is trying to market to the masses, a lot of consumers are struggling right now. And especially with these high rates, that's not good. So the market's seeing that if the Fed pauses on September, that's going to be very bullish. Now, I've said that it's most likely that they will. And even when the target rate was 47%, I still said it's most likely that they will based on the data that we're getting. Well, what are we seeing? As I showed earlier in this video, we're seeing that the target rate possibilities for September of them hiking is lowering, which is good. So that's kind of an indication that everyone's starting to believe that the Feds won't hike in September 20th. Now, what clues do we want to look into? Well, like I said, the Fed Beige Book to really see what's going on in the economic conditions. We want to see that, yeah, okay, fine, consumers are kind of struggling a bit, okay, yeah, but it's something that's manageable, right? And we also want to really see that, hey, labor is weakening, but to a point where it's still not going to be catastrophic, right? And I know it's very hostile. We're in a hostile environment where we want to see the labor market cool off. That's exactly what the Feds want in order to fight inflation. But at the same time, they don't want the labor market to cool off tremendously, as that could trigger a recession. One of the only reasons why we're not in a recession is because of the labor market. You can't have people working and getting a paycheck and have a recession, because at the end of the day, yeah, people could go into debt, but they still have income coming in so that they could kind of manage. It's when people lose their jobs where just things capitulate and fall off. And so that's not what we're seeing. We are seeing loosening in the labor market to a point that the Feds want to see, and so that's good. And so we're going to want to listen to what the Fed speakers are going to say coming to September 7th, as it's an indicator for September 20th. And so if we hear good data from the Fed Beige Book, as well as the speakers kind of seeing a little bit more optimism, well, that could push us back up the overall markets as well as Tesla. Now, do I think that we're going to go into all-time highs?
No, I don't think so yet. And I want to clarify, a lot of individuals view me as a bear for Tesla, and that could be the furthest from the truth. I'm actually very bullish to Tesla. I have exposure to Tesla also in my long-term portfolio. It's just that the macroeconomic environment is just not that suitable for Tesla to thrive. I think once we get into 2024 and we finally start seeing the Fed start cutting rates and no longer holding them as long as they can, I think that's when the bull rally starts to really pick up. I think that's when we exit out of this secular bear market. But until then, I don't expect Tesla or the overall markets to be very bullish. In fact, if we take a look, I also pointed out that this was an area right over here where it's a descending trend line, where it's been an area where we see Tesla getting rejected for a while. So in order to even see Tesla break into all-time highs, first we would even have to see Tesla just break above this area from a descending trend line. So as a trader, what are some of the things I'm looking at? Or as an investor, what are some of the things I'm looking at? Well, as an investor, it's very simple, right? I always just dollar cost average, but for specific stocks like Tesla, I don't just buy in equally each month. I do that mostly for my index funds. I know everyone has their own approach when it comes to investing, and some people may add in equally each month. Some people may do lump sums. I do equally each month for my ETFs that I invest in, or my index funds. But when it comes to specific stocks like Tesla, I don't like doing that, right? What I like doing when it comes to Tesla is not just buying when things are selling off. You hear very often individuals say, oh, just buy the dip, just buy the dip. But oftentimes that's not the best way to go about it, because sometimes you could buy the dip, and as I often like to say, and it's not grammatically correct, the dip can get dippier. And so what I like to do is wait for that sell-off, wait for that confirmation of an uptrend, and then add more in. That's part of the 3 stages of a reversal, which I have a separate video on, which you guys could feel free to watch, right? So what did I do when Tesla stock was selling off, when I said, hey, the earnings is not good? I'm not going to talk about it, but for months I was saying Tesla was most likely going to sell off, and I know a lot of individuals were calling me crazy until it started happening. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous how a lot of people just don't understand the fundamentals, right? And there's a lot of people who are perma bulls for Tesla, and that's great, but they're oblivious to the fundamentals. They just think Tesla's going to go straight up forever, and that's not necessarily the case. You have to look at everything together. And so when I was saying Tesla was selling off, again, I was called crazy, but once we started to see that confirmation, what did I do? I added into my portfolio. So it's very simple. If you're a long-term investor, it's honestly very simple. If you're bullish on Tesla and you see things selling off, well, you just wait for that sell-off, wait for that confirmation of a bounce, and you add in. So simple. I'm sad that I even had to explain that, but some individuals may not know that, and so that's why I make these videos. But let's talk about from the perspective of a trader, right? If you're looking at things from the short term, one, you have to understand that this may be the month where, as a trader, you may want to sit out a little bit more, right? Why is that? Well, we may see some consolidation and huge swings up and down, bouncing up and down. Why? Well, it's September. September is historically volatile, and there's a quote from Jesse Livermore, who's one of the greatest traders to ever live, and he said a quote, it's an old adage that you could win a horse race, but you can't win the races, meaning that you're not always going to get it right. And so when there's volatile months like September where things are bouncing up and down, as a trader, it may be the time to really sit out and just wait for that big move, whether that big move is upwards or that big move is downwards, right? You may want to sit out for September, and I believe that if we hold up around this area that I talked about, we may just consolidate until we either have some negative news from the economic data, or if we have some positive news from the economic data tied in with the positive catalysts of Cybertrucks, well, that could push us upwards. And I know individuals hate when I give a bull case and a bear case, right? But you can't be dogmatic when it comes to the market. You can't just have one idea and say, oh, it's just going to go up. You have to be able to understand and really depict different scenarios and see what is your approach going to be in these different scenarios. If Tesla goes upwards, what are you going to do? If Tesla goes downwards, what are you going to do? You want to have a plan and really go ahead and take action once your plan starts actually happening, right? And so that's what we're looking at. My view on Tesla is that we may just pretty much have these aggressive swings up and down for a while. But again, if we have positive news, it could push us upwards. And so that's what I'm looking for Tesla. But I don't think we're going to go into all-time highs, as the next concern is, will the Feds hike in the next month after September? And then from there, then we look into the fundamentals of Tesla, such as the delivery numbers. But for now, we'll keep it as is, as where we're currently at. And hopefully this video provided some utility so you get a better understanding of what are some things you should pay attention to. Make sure to like this video if you haven't done so already. Subscribe to the channel as it helps out tremendously. And with that said, I'll see you guys on this next video right over here. Take care, guys.